Welcome to Friday night's video in our Master Series. This is the 25th video in our Master Series and the 12th video in our editing phase in this series. And tonight we're going to talk about ADSR envelopes. So basically whenever we're talking about ADSR envelopes, we're talking about dealing with transients, is basically we're dealing with the problems. Later on in processing, we may do other ADSR work, but for now we're just trying to fix issues. So basically, what we're looking at is when we're dealing with ADSR, we've gone one solution is we're going to cut at the problem areas of the ADSR and adjust. The next thing we'll use an ADSR tool or envelope shaper, and sometimes we might stretch and compress the audio. So, I mean, depending on what's going on. So first of all, cutting at it, if you've got like a really easy example is with this drum hit. Now, with this drum hit, we have an attack that comes in there. The attack can be adjusted even with the fades here. The overall gain of the attack can be adjusted here. The actual decay of the attack can be adjusted here, and the sustain can be adjusted here, and the release, the fade out, can be adjusted here. And if you keep it that simple in your mind that you have an attack, a release, a sustain, or a sustain and then a release, attack, decay, sustain, and release, then even adjusting your DAW like that is fairly simple. And to keep that picture in your mind when dealing with any type of ADSR. Now, also, you can cut it along those areas, and whenever you're seeing of an issue, you're seeing an attack, you can see the attack lasts these two parts right here. Then it immediately goes into the decay down to this. It looks like there's a sustain between here and here. And then there's basically a slow release. It goes down to this one real fast on the way to release. And basically you've got the envelope there, and you can determine if there's any part of it that's a problem. This takes time because sometimes, and with some instruments and some sounds, you may not hear it. And then in some instruments, you've got a voice. La, 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 la. I mean, dealing with the ADSR of that is a little difficult when it's flowing around all over the place. And sometimes you're just dealing with the envelope as it flows and what's going on. And you can deal with it the same way, as that the envelope has gone up, it's gone down, it's gone all over the place. And instead of just seeing it as an ADSR, you're seeing that it's dynamic fluctuations, smooth dynamic fluctuations, and sometimes rapid, harsh changing fluctuations. I'm not trying to do opera for you, but you understand there can be some things happening there that don't just sound like ADSR. You're like, well, bro, this doesn't sound like that. Well, then you just kind of have to deal with it accordingly. Find the places where different changes start and end. You can have rises, sustains, falls, decays, all kinds of things that aren't just simply ADSR. But that gives you kind of a rough idea of being able to spot when those things are happening so that you can adjust them if you hear that that's a problem. You might hear that this rise, something might be happening there in the recording that the performer didn't perform it well, and it doesn't sound right. Some part of it of that envelope that you have to adjust accordingly and do something with it, make some kind of adjustment with it. So you can either do it that way, cutting it like that at those spots and making adjustments and doing it that way. Or you can go to, like we talked about, using some type of an envelope shaper, ADSR tool, or an envelope shaper. And you have to also remember that in those things you can also stretch the audio. So if you're having some type of problem in there, you can analyze it, take something like this is a bend tool, and put in flags wherever you think are necessary, and stretch the audio. Also stretch and compress audio where you think it might need stretching and compressing. If that makes sense, this one's showing going to be an audio anomaly that's stretched way too far. It ain't going to function. That's in the red. You're splitting a sample there. So, that's the stretching and compressing can also work very well for you trying to deal with, those issues of your ADSR, because sometimes it's length, length compressions and lengths, that it's a problem you have to deal with. Also, besides that you have things like envelope shapers. Now, envelope shapers, ADSR tools, I recommended this one. This is an LFL tool by Expert, and its primary function for me is it's an ADSR tool. So, I mean, the basic concept is you've got an attack, a decay, a sustain, and release. Now, on something going on over a 2 or 3 beat period of time, it might be doing this. La 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 wah, wah, going all over the place, dropping way down there, and all of a sudden you got this serious rise going up here with the vocal that it's like, man, it's like flowing all over the place. It starts looking more like this. Does that make sense? Where you've got, this kind of stuff like this happening, not just a simple ADSR for this one passage over like 4 bars. Following that envelope. And that's basically the envelope, what's happening over a certain period of time. So that's maybe a very comical way of setting it, but this is starting at the beginning of bar 1 and ending at, bar 4 before it goes to the next measure. And that was the envelope of whatever was going on there. And you are trying to set that in time, trying to find it, and then make adjustments. I need to reduce that. It sounds better up a little like that. He's dropping too far. He's not raising loud enough there. I want to drop down farther there, and then do that real high rise before he drops right down there before he hits the next measure. And I know that sounds funny, but this ADSR tool, besides just basic ADSR, that it can become that complicated, especially if you're dealing with vocals. And then I'm riding on the train, whatever might be happening, that it's just not simple ADSR. It is, that's a drum hit, bro. Does that make sense? Or a pad on a synth. It's not, live action Freddie Mercury during a concert or something, or some opera singer, and to look at it that way that a tool like this can really make sense of what you're trying to do. That you've got it set up to really mess with that envelope between bar 1 and bar 4 in that measure and what's happening inside of there, because you're hearing some kind of issue. So whenever dealing with this type of situation, you really need to get a tool like this and then experiment with it so that you can really understand the rate, the bar, the length that you're setting it on, if you're putting it on a short area. Or you might have a bunch of like drum hits or pad hits on a synthesizer that are all at 1/4, quarter beats. Bump, 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 and you want to set up a certain envelope that's going to repeat. That it's going to go this envelope, and then it's going to do that exact envelope again the next time that pad hits, so that you can fix some problem in the ADSR. Because I went and shaped this ADSR, but actually the only problem that I was hearing is right here. And I wanted to bring that up some. It's because that's where the problem was. Then oh yeah, that sounds awesome. All the sound that was happening through the rest of that envelope through that measure sounds fine. It was just that one little area. And I kind of had to map it out a little bit so that I could address that one area rather than cutting on it. Because then I'm not cutting on it. It's more like an automated volume automation, which you can also do this with volume automation. So keep that in mind. This tool is really cool, and you've just got to experiment with it and fuss with it just about in any kind of situation. But also, like I said, you can also do this with volume automation. You've got something going on here. You've got an attack. Does that make sense? You've got a decay down to here. Does that make sense? You've got a sustain, and then you've got a sustain at some certain level, and then you've got a release going down here. Does that make sense? And you can shape it out with volume automation really simply to do adjustments. I want to adjust right there. This over here, I'm going to put a little node because right here I want that to be up a little bit, and then I want this to kind of gradually go down there. So I might put another node there and delete that one because I don't want to drop off a little bit there. Then it's got a longer fade off. And you're dealing with the envelope like that as an envelope shaper using just your volume automation, and then you can just render it. I mean, this might look kind of funny, but if I take this off and I go like this and I command bounce this, well, that was the automation I just did on it. Does that make sense with the volume automation? I mean, I wasn't trying to do anything but just show you that it's possible. So those things you basically have to experiment with. And telling you what is a problem and what isn't a problem is going to be you learning to trust your own ear that there's a problem with that bass hit, or there's a problem in that snare hit, or when the guy was singing, he was doing that part needs to be louder and softer. You know, automation's great because sometimes you can't fuss with stuff that it's like, I can't cut that and do this swell thing. I mean, how am I going to swell that up there with cutting it? You know, I can't. You know, there is no knob when I go in here, and if I cut this here, there's no knob to do that. You know what I'm saying? In this, that you know, that you have for adjusting the audio that way. But in the volume automation, you definitely do, and you can really adjust the audio in just all kinds of different ways. You know, you can shape it in all kinds of different ways with curves and all kinds of things to really work on your envelope and your ADSR and what the problem might be in it. So all those things you basically want to experiment. In that, I definitely recommend you practice with your volume automation, practice cutting the ADSR out like I showed you and experimenting with it like that, finding it and adjusting it. And that LFO tool from Expert Records, that's an ADSR tool, I highly recommend it because it can save you countless hours of fussing with 500 snare hits or 500 drum hits. And it's also a great sculpting tool besides your volume automation, taking samples and adjusting samples, besides we're just doing the editing. So those are some great editing tools to fuss with your ADSR until it gets sounding the way you want it and to fix problems you might be having in it. So peace, hope, love. I hope you enjoyed the series so far, and I certainly hope you enjoyed dealing with ADSR and some tools to deal with it. And I'll see you in the next video when we deal with waveform density issues.